Hi everyone, this is just a quick video going through English Language Paper 1. Specifically, we're going to focus on question 3. So this is looking at the exam paper, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. And this is also a follow-up from another video that we did called English Language Paper 1 Revision, where we looked at the same text that we're going to be looking at today, but instead we looked at question 1, question 2, and now we're going to move on to have a look at question 3 using the same extract, but starting to think about what are the key techniques that you need to know and how do you approach this question. This is a question that I see people struggle with time and time again, so it's really important that you get it firmly in your head how to approach this question and how to answer it effectively. So first of all then, what is structure and why is it so important in our writing? Well, structure is massively important, not just when we're analysing a text, but also when we're thinking about producing our own example of creative writing. So what is structure? Structure is the organisational framework of a story. Simply put, a story structure will have a beginning, a middle, an end. So if you're one of those people that struggles on how to actually answer this question, at the very simplest level, you can always break it down to what is happening at the beginning, how has that changed in the middle, and how has it ended? Or how has the writer structured it and what kind of impact has that had on the audience? So the reason why it's important is because structure helps to interest and engage the audience. Successful writers think carefully about the structure of their writing and try to get the biggest impact on their audience. So it's kind of like a joke, and if anyone has ever told a joke or heard a joke that has just been told in the wrong order, you might have an idea what I mean by this. Sometimes people will tell a joke and they'll tell it badly, and they'll tell you the punchline before they've actually set it up. And structure in your writing is just as important as that. You have to think, when do I need to give certain pieces of information? Is that going to really grip their attention, engage them in the text, and make them want to really read on and engage with what I'm trying to say? Now we're going to look at a few of the key structural techniques that you need to know for question 3. Now there are many different techniques that are really important for this question, but we can break it down to 4 that are considered potentially the most important ones to know. So if you're not too sure on your structure, if you find this question a little bit overwhelming, just think that these ones are the main staple ones that you're going to find in the vast majority of your extracts. So first of all then, we have exposition on the left hand side, shifting focus, foreshadowing and resolution. So as I said previously, these are some of the 4 most important structural techniques that you'll find in your writing, and some of them will appear a little bit more often than others. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to reveal the answers. If you'd like to pause the video at this point, take your time, read through the actual definitions and try to figure it out for yourself, then that's fine. But just know that now we're going to go ahead and reveal the answers. So first of one is exposition, and the correct definition is it occurs at the beginning of a story and is meant to set up an exciting incident, which is a moment where the action kicks off in the story. Now this is a really important one to know because an exposition just means how is the story opened. Now in your exam there's no guarantee that you get the start of a story. It could come from any point within a story, the extract that you're faced with, but you still need to think, for that passage, how has it begun? Does it actually grab your attention? Does it actually make you want to stay with the text and get committed with the story that is being told? So exposition is a really important one because it's really good to think about how has the writer started the extract, and you can think about that for every single text that you're faced with. Next one is shift in focus. Some teachers also call this focus shift. You might know it as narrative shift or perspective shift, and they all kind of fall into the same remit really when you say shift in focus. So shift in focus then, it's when the writer changes the time, the topic, the person or place in the extract. And simply put, we get a shift in focus every time we have a new paragraph. Not every new paragraph that you have in your extract is going to be particularly interesting, so the real task with this one is to think, why has the writer shifted this focus to this character or this event? What purpose have they used that for, and does it really grab our attention and keep us engaged in the story? Again, just like exposition, shifting focus is going to be in every single extract. that you're faced with in your exam. So it's definitely one that I'd talk about in my response. The next one, foreshadowing, you won't always find this, but it's still a really good one to know. So this one is a hint or an indication of something to come. So essentially it's where the one of the paragraphs is giving us a slight hint that something bad is going to happen or something good that's going to happen, and it kind of leads in to actually the rest of the extract and helps build a little bit of tension and suspense for the reader. And the final one, resolution. So similarly to things like the exposition and the shift in focus, there's going to be either a resolution or there's going to be a cliffhanger. So 50% of the time you might get a resolution, the other times, so the other 50%, you're probably going to get a cliffhanger. Okay, so resolution, this comes at the end of a story where the problem or conflict has come to a satisfying end. If it hasn't come to a satisfying end, if it hasn't been resolved, whatever problem they might be dealing with in the story or the extract, then it will be considered a cliffhanger. So a cliffhanger is where we are left asking a few extra questions and are still a little bit unsure about what's fully happened to the characters or the people within the actual story. If you have a look at the actual stretch and challenge task at the top of this slide, it says recall the key term for the remaining definition. So if we have a look over our right hand side, you can see that there's still one remaining that hasn't been matched up. So it says this is considered the most interesting or exciting part of the story. That is a really important one to know as well. We call that the climax, which means the bit, the most action, the most kind of atmospheric, the most interesting part that you're going to get within the extract. So it hasn't been matched up there because there's no other definition there available, but it's just a good one just to test your understanding. So these are some of the main ones that you could choose, but think, are there any others that you're aware of? If you're still not sure, take your time, go back over these, and in a moment we're going to have a look at the extract and we're going to see where we can identify how structure has been used to really grab the reader's attention. Now let's break down the question. So what is it really asking us to do? So as you can see here on the left hand side, this is a typical example of what you're going to face in the exam. It says you now need to think about the whole of the source, and when we say the whole of the source, it means it has to be the entire extract that you've been given for the exam. This extract is from the beginning of a novel, and as I said previously, not every single extract is going to come from that part, but a good portion of them often do. So you've got quite a chance of it coming from the start of a novel. The main body of the question is here. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So if we break down the key components of the question, the first thing you need to think about is that this is the first question, really the only question in section A, that asks you to talk about the whole of the extract. Everything else will give you line numbers to actually specifically identify where you need to draw the information from, but for this one you can talk about all of the text. We have quite a strange word here that a lot of people are trying to get changed. This idea of how has structure been used to interest you? Now, a lot of people, a lot of teenagers certainly look at that and think, well, it hasn't really interested me. So we're not really using that word interest in the same way that we'd use it in everyday life. When we say interest you, we mean how would it interest someone who's really engaged in this text? How would it help carry the plot forward? And how would it help the story make more sense, build more tension, or a more appropriate kind of sense of excitement or joy as they progress through the extracts? The next thing to think about are these bullet points. Now, a lot of people just avoid these and don't really pay much attention to them, but it's actually a really helpful guide on what to include in your response. So when it says what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, we can think back to our previous task where we were matching up the techniques, and of course that is referring to the exposition, which is the posh word for the beginning of the source. So it's literally telling you in the bullet point, this is something we'd probably advise you to write about. Second one, how and why the writer changes this focus as a source develops. Again, if you've got things like change in focus, that refers back to the key structural technique of a shift in focus. So it's saying, is there anything that has changed, any big shift that actually grabs our attention or makes this particularly engaging? And any other structural features that interest you. So the last bullet point is just saying, in order to get a high mark, you need to be able to demonstrate that you know these structural techniques and understand how they've actually been used to grab our attention and engage the reader in the text. Look at the beginning of the extract and think carefully about the structure being used. So just for the example of this video, we're only going to look at this part at the moment. If you'd like to actually look at the full source, it's available to download. There'll be a link in the description if you want to do it, or you could look back at our previous videos on this text as well. So we're just going to go on the beginning at the moment. So here's the extract. Tommy was surrounded by darkness. Stretching his arms out in front of him, his fingers sought out something familiar, something to help guide him. His heart was beating so loud he was sure the sound would wake the whole house. Wiping a bead of sweat from his long, angular nose, he forced himself to keep moving. He had only one chance, just this one moment to make things right, and the possibility of failing filled him with dread. What I'd like to think about is this an effective opening? And what kind of structural technique can this be linked to? So, as I said previously, this is coming from the opening of an extract. So the key thing that we need to have in our mind is this an effective beginning? Is it an effective exposition? So can we use this in our actual response? So have a look, have a think through it. What is happening in this extract? Is it a little bit more normal or just straightforward, or is there something a bit more exciting going on there? We look down at the next paragraph. It says, downstairs, Abby's gaze was fixed on the bright lights issuing from the TV screen. She wasn't paying attention. Her eyes had simply been drawn to the colourful studio where a couple raced against the clock to answer questions for that elusive holiday of a lifetime. So if we look at the second paragraph there as well, every time you have a different paragraph, you should be thinking, can I link this to a key structural technique? So if it's talking about one character at the start there, and we can see right there at the top of the first extract, it starts off with this character, Tommy. Now, Tommy is someone who's actually broken into somebody's house, and that little bit of information would have been provided to you at the top of the source as well. Generally, that's quite an interesting start. So you might be able to say that this is an interesting exposition, and you might be able to find a quotation in this first paragraph to help support that idea. When we look at the second paragraph, however, we see there's a massive shift here, a shift in focus. So we're now no longer talking about Tommy, we've now shifted to another character who's referred to as Abby. So is that an appropriate shift in focus? Is that something that's going to engage you as a reader? If not, then maybe you need to have a look back at the source and see if there's another appropriate shift in focus or other structural technique you can comment on. But it's really important to think, why has the writer actually done this? What effect does it have that in the first paragraph it talks about Tommy, someone who's broken into a house, and then we have the massive shift in focus to another character, this character Abby, who's actually downstairs watching the TV as all of this goes on above her. So have a think, see if it is something you could comment on. If not, it's worthwhile to get up the actual extract and have a look through yourself and see if you can make any annotations and identify any structural techniques that could be used in the extracts. Now that we've had a chance to actually look at the extracts, let's have a think about how to actually approach writing our response to this question. So there are a few things that you need to consider whenever you approach a new extract, and those are things like, when I first start to read the text, what is the writer focusing my attention on? So there has to be a reason. Why are they choosing that specific thing or that specific moment to introduce you into the story? There has to be a reason. It's been chosen on purpose. Number two, how is this being developed? So regardless of how the story starts, how is it changing? How is it moving on? What shift of focus is being used? And why are we changing focus? Why might that be relevant to the rest of the story? And the final one, what does the writer focus my attention on at the end of the text? The end of the text is massively important, the same way the start of it is as well. So there's always key areas that you want to be looking at whenever you start thinking about putting your response together. Here are some things to avoid. Now these are things that I see every single year when I mark for the exam board, so don't speak about language techniques in this question. This is something that might seem very obvious, but it happens every single year. You cannot talk about language techniques for question 3. Now you can actually say, point out a word, but don't analyze it. Okay, so don't talk about the word class or the connotations associated with that word. Don't talk about similes or metaphors, anything like that, or any massive techniques. You're purely commenting on the structure and how it's been put together. Next one, as I just said, don't comment on connotations of a keyword or phrase. And don't write more than 3 paragraphs. The question's only worth 8 marks, so in the exam you should aim to spend about 10 minutes on this question. If you spend any more than 10 minutes on this question, then it means you're not really giving enough time to the other areas of the exam that really require more attention because they're worth greater marks than question 3. Look at the student response. As we look at it, I'd like you to consider, has it effectively responded to the question? So here's our response. And after we've read the response, we're going to think about, can we use the mark scheme to actually understand what kind of mark or level this response is going to achieve? Even though the question isn't present on the board here, you should know that question 3 is always going to be, how has the writer used structure to interest the reader? Okay, so have that in your mind as we go through the response. So it says, the writer has used an effective exposition to engage the reader in the story. Tommy was surrounded by darkness. The exposition creates a sense of intrigue. The protagonist seems to be in an unusual situation and we are eager to find out what happens next. In addition, the writer has also used a shift in focus to add tension as we realise there are other characters in the house and the audience expects this to lead to some kind of confrontation. So if we start thinking about what makes this effective, the first thing I would look out for is, have they actually mentioned a structural technique? And we can see there right in the first line they've mentioned the exposition, which of course tells me they're going to start focusing on the start of the extract. Now it's good to use a quotation to support your ideas, and it's done that quite well. This quotation that says Tommy was surrounded by darkness. So it's kind of following like a normal kind of point, evidence, explain kind of structure that you might have used in your normal English lessons. The exposition creates a sense of intrigue, and what he means by intrigue is that it makes the reader engaged and gets us interested in the text. So he's explained it quite well also. Something that I like here is that they've used this word. This is a really good word to use whenever you're analysing any kind of text. It's mentioned the word protagonist. If you're not sure what we mean by that, the protagonist is simply going to be the main character. Now, it's a good word to know because it's better than just constantly saying, Tommy does this, Tommy does that, and it makes it sound a little bit more professional and a little bit more educated in your response. So the protagonist seems to be in an unusual situation and we're eager to find out what happens next. So in a sense, the candidate has pointed out a structural technique. They've supported that technique and their point with an appropriate quotation, and they've explained the relevance of it. So far, so good. Something that is good to see is that they've gone further. A lot of people would have left it there, and that's an easy way to lose yourself some marks because that alone, that first part, wouldn't have been enough for one paragraph. So they're trying to build on the response a little bit. In addition, the writer has also used a shift in focus, which again we know is a key structural technique, to add tension, as we realise there are other characters in the house and the audience expects this to lead to some kind of confrontation. So they're trying to work through literally why is that engaging. A lot of people get confused when we say exposition. Obviously it means the start of the extract, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's just the first paragraph. The exposition could be more than that. So the fact that it's actually mentioned the shift in focus in terms of the second paragraph that they're talking about, that is absolutely fine and appropriate. So now we're going to move on and just look at the mark scheme. So this is the mark scheme that the examiner is genuinely going to use to help justify the grade that you're awarded. One thing that I'll point out with these ones is that there's not really much difference between each levels. The examiner will generally start at the bottom, and they kind of use it like snakes and ladders. If you achieve the lower levels, then you'll move yourself up. This can be a little bit hard to understand when you look at it by yourself, because English teachers, English examiners like to use quite sophisticated language even in the mark scheme, so it can be a little bit hard to break down, but we're going to have a go now. So if we have a look at that first bullet point for level 2, attempts to comment on the effects of structural features. So if it says you attempt to comment, that tells me that you've tried, but you haven't quite managed it. Okay, so that's where they're losing a few marks. They've tried to comment on how these structural techniques might have interested us, but they haven't really explained it well enough. The next one, the second bullet point, says selects some appropriate examples. And it's this word some. And what's implied behind this word is that they haven't used enough. So they haven't used enough quotations, they haven't referred enough back to the text and how the structure's been used appropriately. And the final one, makes some use of subject terminology. Again, you've got that word some, which again means they haven't used enough. So the second one would be about using the right amount of quotations. The last one is about, have they actually identified, is it a foreshadowing, is it a shift in focus, is it a climax, have they actually linked it to the subject terminology? And in that case, it sounds like they haven't done so well enough. When we move up the mark scheme, however, you can see that the language starts to change. So we look straight at the actual bullet points. We look at the one that says explains clearly the effects of the writer's choices. So it's not attempting anymore, it's actually explaining it clearly. Okay, so it means that they've actually achieved more than they have in the previous level. The next bullet point there, select a range of relevant examples. So a range is more than some. It means that you've had at least 3 maybe examples to back it up. Makes clear and accurate use of subject terminology. So we've moved away from these words like some, and we're moved towards much more positive words like using a range, having a clear understanding, and things like that. That's just showing me straight away that this response is going to be much more successful at level 3. The final one, level 4, this is where it gets really, really high level. So you can see there, 7 to 8 marks. That means you'll be getting full marks potentially if you get into that level 4 range. So we'll go for the top bullet point again. Analyze the effects of the writer's choice of structural features. Now, when it says analyze the effects, it means, are you breaking down the effects? Really commenting on what effect has this had? Really trying to explain how is it interesting, how is it engaging the reader. Similarly to the level 3, it uses that word range on the second bullet point. Select a range of judicious quotations. Now this is a word, very, very posh word, that throws a lot of people off. So a range simply means that they've used, quite a few quotations, and judicious examples means that you've identified some really fantastic ones that are considered some of the best examples available. And the final one, makes sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So you've not just said what the subject terminology is. So you've not just said the writer has used a shift in focus, but you've actually talked about it in an accurate way to show that you know the effects of this technique, and a sophisticated way. So you've actually made links to the rest of the text and said how that actually helps build a sense of tension, excitement, or intrigue for the reader. If you'd like to have a go at this question yourself, please feel free to look through the video again and to use the mark scheme to come to a grade for your own example. Or you could also leave us a comment or even ask me to have a look at an example for you. I'll be more than happy to do so to give you some feedback. If you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, you can leave us a comment below, like and subscribe, or visit our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and if you need anything, please don't hesitate to get in touch. and drop us a message. Thank you. Bye.